The night my uncle announced I was being removed from the company, I was wearing my mother's pearl earrings. I don't know why that detail sticks with me. Maybe because I'd borrowed them that morning without asking, thinking it was just another quarterly family dinner at the Hargrove estate. The kind where my uncle poured expensive scotch and made toasts to the next generation of leadership while looking directly at his own son. I'd worn the earrings because I wanted to feel like I belonged there. Like I had as much right to sit at that table as anyone. I didn't know it would be the last time I ever felt that way. My uncle, Hargrove. That's what everyone called him, even his own kids, even my mother when she was alive. Stood at the head of the mahogany dining table with a glass in his hand and a look on his face I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, something colder. Like he'd been rehearsing this moment for years and was finally ready. There were maybe 30 people in that room. Business partners, extended family, my cousin's new fiancé who I'd met exactly once, the family attorney, Mr. Bister. Aldridge sitting in the corner with a leather folio on his lap like he already knew what was coming. I was the only one who didn't. "I've made a decision," Hargrove said, setting his glass down, "about the future of Hargrove Capital." My father had started the company. He died when I was 11. A heart attack, sudden, on a Tuesday morning in March. I still remember my teacher pulling me out of 6th grade math class and the look on her face before she even said a word. After he passed, Hargrove stepped in to run things. He told my mother it was temporary. He told her he'd hold it in trust until I was old enough. I was 31. I had an MBA from Georgetown. I had spent 6 years working at the firm, starting in client relations, learning every department, doing everything right, and Hargrove was looking at me across that table like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house. "As of this quarter," he said, "I'll be transitioning full ownership of Hargrove Capital to my son, Victor. It's what's best for the company's future." The room went quiet the way rooms do when something uncomfortable happens and nobody wants to be the first to react. I said, "That's my father's company." My voice came out steadier than I expected. I heard it from a distance, like someone else was speaking. Hargrove looked at me. Just looked at me. Then he said, "Your father left it in my care. I've honored that. But the company needs leadership with a long-term vision, and I've made my decision." "He left it in your care for me," I said. "That was the arrangement. That was always the arrangement." "That's your interpretation," he said. And he turned back to the room like I hadn't spoken. Like I was already gone. I don't know what I expected. Maybe someone to say something. My cousin Victor was studying the tablecloth. His fiancée was on her phone. Mr. Aldridge opened his folio and clicked his pen. And then Hargrove did something I will never, for the rest of my life, be able to explain as anything other than cruelty. He walked around the table to where I was sitting, slowly, deliberately. Every person in that room was watching. And he picked up my champagne glass, my glass, in front of my plate, poured for me, and he moved it to the empty seat at the far end of the table. It was such a small gesture. It was the most devastating thing anyone has ever done to me. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to. My legs just moved. I walked to the door and I didn't look back because I knew if I looked back I would cry, and I had promised myself years ago that I would never cry in front of Hargrove. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. The night was cold, February in Northern Virginia, and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept thinking about my father. About the Saturday mornings he used to take me to the office with him, let me sit in his big chair and spin around while he worked. He used to say, "This will all be yours someday, Bug." Everything I built. I had believed him. I had believed him for 20 years. I drove home. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Alexandria. I'd been saving to buy a place, but kept telling myself to wait. Once the ownership transferred, once things settled, I'd have the capital to do it right. I'd been waiting a long time. I made tea. I didn't drink and sat on my couch and stared at the wall until almost midnight. Then I went to sleep because I didn't know what else to do. At 7:15 the next morning, someone knocked on my door. I thought it was my neighbor. She sometimes knocked early if she'd gotten a package delivered to the wrong unit. I answered the door in my robe, hair unbrushed, probably still looking like someone who had cried in the shower for 20 minutes. There were two people standing in my hallway, a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, wearing a charcoal blazer. A younger man beside her, maybe mid-30s, with a briefcase and the kind of careful expression that lawyers learn in their first year of practice. "Ms. Hargrove," the woman said. "That's me," I said out of instinct. It was my name. It had always been my name. "My name is Catherine Ossie. I'm a partner at Ossie and Whitfield. This is my associate, James." She paused. "We represent a man named Leonard Voss. He's asked us to reach out to you directly." Another pause, shorter. "He's your biological father." I didn't say anything for a long time. Long enough that Catherine Ossie glanced at her associate and then back at me with something careful in her expression, like she'd delivered difficult news before and knew to give it room. "I think," I finally said, "you have the wrong person." "We don't," she said. "May we come in?" I stepped back. I don't know why. Some automatic politeness that kicks in even when your brain has stopped working. They sat on my couch. I sat across from them in the armchair my mother had reupholstered the year before she got sick. Green velvet. She'd been so proud of it. Catherine Ossie opened a folder on her lap. She laid a photograph on my coffee table. A baby. 6 months old, maybe, with a round face and a serious expression, sitting on a blanket with a small stuffed rabbit beside her. "Her name was Mara Lynn Voss," Catherine said. "She was reported missing on September 14th, 1994. She was 8 months old." I looked at the photograph, then I looked up at Catherine. "You're saying that's me?" "A DNA sample was collected as part of a routine hospital visit when you were 3 years old," she said. "It was entered into a national database at your guardian's request. We believe it was done to establish your identity for insurance purposes. Mr. Voss's legal team flagged it 14 months ago." 14 months, I repeated. "There were legal processes to follow," James said. It was the first thing he'd said. "Verification, confirmation, chain of custody. We wanted to be certain before we came to you. Mr. Voss has been searching for his daughter for 30 years, Catherine said. Her voice was careful but not unkind. "He never stopped." I picked up the photograph. The baby looked back at me with those serious, dark eyes. The stuffed rabbit beside her had a small bow around its neck. "Who took me?" I asked. Catherine and James exchanged a look. "We believe the woman you knew as your mother and her brother. The man you know as your uncle arranged the adoption through channels that were not legal." I set the photograph down. "My mother," I said. "We're sorry. My mother has been dead for 4 years." "We know," Catherine said. "We're sorry." I sat with that for a moment. My mother, who had held my hand in the hospital when I had my appendix out at age 9, who had taught me to drive in an empty church parking lot on the Saturday morning, who had called me every Sunday night for the first 3 years I was in college, who had, I thought, loved me completely, the way mothers love their children. My mother, who had taken someone's baby. I don't know what to do with a grief that is 2 things at once. I still don't, honestly. The love doesn't go away just because the truth changes the shape of it. I've learned that much. "What does he want?" I asked. "Leonard Voss. What does he want from me?" "To meet you," Catherine said simply. "That's all he's asked for. Whatever happens after that is entirely your decision." I looked around my apartment. The green velvet chair. The tea I'd made and forgotten on the counter. My father's, the man I thought was my father's. Photograph on the shelf by the window. The one of the 2 of us on a hiking trip in Shenandoah when I was 8. Him laughing at something I'd said. "I need a few days," I said. "Of course," Catherine said. She left a card on the coffee table. "Call whenever you're ready. There's no pressure." They let themselves out. I sat in my apartment for a very long time after they left, not moving, just thinking about a baby on a blanket with a stuffed rabbit. Here's what I pieced together over the following weeks, from Catherine's files, from court documents, from a private investigator Leonard Voss had kept on retainer for a decade. Leonard Voss was not a billionaire. He was not a dynasty. He was a pediatric cardiologist in Richmond, Virginia, who had, in the mid-1990s, married a woman named Sandra who left him when their daughter was 6 months old. Sandra had a brother. That brother was the man I had called uncle my entire life. The adoption had been arranged quietly, through a private agency that was later shut down for unethical practices. My mother, Sandra, had signed papers giving up her rights. But she had not told Leonard she was doing it. He'd believed his daughter was living with Sandra's family. By the time he found out, the trail was already cold and the legal pathways were expensive and complicated. He had spent 30 years and what Catherine described as a significant personal fortune trying to find his daughter. He had hired attorneys in 3 states. He had worked with private investigators, with advocacy organizations, with DNA databases. He had never stopped. When I finally agreed to meet him, it was at a coffee shop in Richmond, a neutral place Catherine had suggested. I drove down on a Thursday morning in March. I remember it was raining. I sat in my car for 10 minutes after I parked, watching the rain on the windshield, trying to figure out what I was going to say to a man who was my father. He was already inside when I walked in. I recognized him from the photograph Catherine had shown me. A tall man, late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of face that had done a lot of careful listening over many years. He stood up when I came through the door. Just stood up, the way people do when someone they've been waiting for finally arrives. We sat across from each other and ordered coffee neither of us drank. He talked first. He told me about Sandra, about the divorce, about the 6 months he'd had with me before everything fell apart. He'd kept photographs. He brought some in an envelope, pictures of a baby I didn't remember being, held by a man with younger hands and a desperate kind of joy on his face. "I want you to know," he said, "I'm not here to make any claims on you. You've had a whole life. I'm not trying to disrupt that." "My whole life was built on a lie," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it was. And I'm sorry for the parts of that I couldn't prevent." He was sorry. This man who had spent 30 years and all his savings trying to find his daughter was apologizing to me. I started crying in the middle of that coffee shop, which I had also promised myself I wouldn't do. He handed me a napkin without saying anything, and that small kindness wrecked me completely. I called Catherine from the parking lot after. "What are my options?" I asked. "Legally, regarding the company." She was quiet for a moment. "We've been looking into that," she said. Here is the part I didn't expect. When I started asking questions, when Catherine's team started pulling records, when a forensic accountant named Harold was brought in to review Hargrove Capital's financials, things started to surface that Hargrove had apparently been counting on staying buried. The trust document my father had established before he died was not, as Hargrove had always implied, ambiguous. It was specific. It named me as the sole beneficiary of his shares upon my 30th birthday, with Hargrove serving as trustee in the interim. I had turned 31 over a year ago. The shares had never been transferred. There was more. Harold found financial transactions going back nearly a decade, money that had moved from company accounts into a separate LLC that turned out to be registered in Victor's name. Not an enormous amount each time, small enough to go unnoticed in quarterly reviews, but it added up. Over 10 years, it added up to just over $4 million. Hargrove had not only stolen my inheritance, he had been stealing from the company itself. I'm not going to pretend the legal process was fast or clean or satisfying in the way courtroom dramas make it look. It wasn't. It took 11 months. There were depositions, countersuits, a lot of early mornings on the phone with Catherine, and a lot of evenings trying not to let the anxiety eat me alive. But here's what happened. The court ruled that the trust document was clear and enforceable. My father's shares were mine. The transfer to Victor was unwound. Harold's forensic report was handed to the FBI, and a federal investigation into the misappropriated funds began 6 months later. Hargrove resigned from the company's board before the indictment came down, but it came down anyway. Victor. My cousin, the man who had sat across from me at that dinner table and stared at the tablecloth while his father moved my champagne glass, called me once during the whole process. He said he hadn't known about the financial irregularities. I don't know if that's true. I chose not to respond. The private adoption arrangement, the one that had brought me into the wrong family for 31 years, was referred to law enforcement as well. My mother was gone. There was no one to prosecute on that side. But Hargrove had been involved in the logistics. That became part of a separate proceeding, that is, as of this writing, still ongoing. I became CEO of Hargrove Capital in January of last year. The name is a conversation I'm still having with myself. My father built it. He named it. It was his legacy before it was taken from me, and there's something in me that wants to honor that, even as I understand that the name itself is complicated now. My first hire was a new CFO with a background in forensic accounting. Just in case. Leonard Voss and I have dinner once a month, usually in Richmond, sometimes in Alexandria. He has a home office full of cardiology journals and a rescue beagle named Franklin, who is, objectively, the best dog I have ever met. He has 2 adult children from a later marriage, a son who is an engineer in Seattle, and a daughter who teaches elementary school in Charlottesville. They are my half-siblings. We have had exactly 2 very awkward and ultimately okay dinners together. He doesn't push. He never pushes. He asks questions and he listens, and when I don't want to talk about something, he lets it go without making it strange. I think in another life, if things had gone the way they were supposed to, he would have been a good father. He still is, actually. In the way that matters. I still have my mother's pearl earrings. I've put them in the box on my dresser, and I don't take them out. I'm not sure I ever will again. But I can't make myself give them away either. The love and the grief are still tangled together in ways I haven't finished sorting out. Maybe I never will. There's a morning I keep coming back to, a Saturday, maybe a month after I met Leonard, when I drove out to Shenandoah by myself. The same park from the photograph on my shelf, the one of me and the man I believed was my father. I hiked for most of the day alone, which I had never done before and turned out to love, and at the top of a ridge with the valley spread out below me, I stood there for a long time just breathing. I had been lied to about nearly everything: my name, my family, my inheritance, the basic facts of where I came from and who I belonged to, and I was still standing. That's not a triumphant thing, exactly. It's just a true thing. The kind of true thing you can only learn by going through something you weren't sure you'd survive. I walked back down the mountain in the late afternoon, got in my car, and drove home to my apartment in Alexandria. I had calls to return and documents to review and a board meeting to prepare for. I had work to do, and for the first time in a long time, it was actually mine. I think about cause and effect a lot more than I used to, not in a dramatic way. Just in the quiet, practical way you start to see things when enough time has passed and you're not in crisis anymore. You start to trace the lines backward. This happened, so that happened, so eventually this other thing had to happen too. It's not fate. It's not some cosmic plan. It's just the way choices accumulate. The way every decision a person makes leaves a mark, and those marks build up over time into something that can't be hidden forever. Hargrove made choices. Quiet, calculated choices that he probably told himself were reasonable. He moved money. He buried documents. He kept a trust that wasn't his to keep. And for years, it worked. Nobody looked too closely. Nobody asked the right questions. I think he genuinely believed he'd gotten away with it, that the comfortable life he'd constructed on top of someone else's foundation was permanent. It wasn't. It never is. What I've learned, and I mean actually learned, not the kind of thing you say because it sounds right, is that the truth has a weight to it. You can press it down for a long time. You can pile things on top of it, but it doesn't disappear, it just waits. And eventually whatever you've stacked on top of it starts to crack, and the weight shifts, and everything comes down at once. That's what happened to Hargrove, not because the universe was punishing him, because the paper trail existed, because a forensic accountant named Harold was thorough, because Leonard Voss never stopped paying attorneys even when it seemed pointless. The truth came out because people kept looking for it and because the choices Hargrove had made left evidence behind. I also think about what it means to build a life on something real versus something borrowed. I spent 6 years working at that company believing I was earning my place. And I was. But the ground I was standing on had been stolen. The moment I found out, I had a choice. I could fall apart, or I could figure out what was actually mine and go get it. I chose the second thing, not because I'm especially brave, because I was angry, and anger, when you aim it right, is actually useful. Leonard taught me something about that. He was angry too, had been for 30 years, and he aimed it at lawyers and investigators and DNA databases instead of at bitterness. He stayed functional. He kept going. There's a kind of intelligence in that, and knowing how to carry something heavy without letting it crush you. I think that's the only real wisdom I have to offer from any of this. Not a lesson. Exactly. Just an observation. The people who hurt you are usually counting on you to stop, to give up, to walk away, to decide the fight isn't worth it. And sometimes it genuinely isn't. But sometimes it is. And the only way to know which is to stay clear-headed enough to see what's actually in front of you instead of what you're afraid of. I'm still learning that. I think most people are.